This episode offers psychosocial education designed to inspire and motivate our listeners. The information provided does not constitute a therapeutic relationship nor a substitute for professional mental health care. If you are experiencing a mental health crisis, call 911, go to your nearest emergency room, or for listeners in the United States, text 988 for the National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. Warning, this episode contains brain food that will lead to improved emotional and social intelligence. Thanks for tuning in to Harvesting Happiness today for a healthy serving of consciously prepared brain food. This is Lisa Cypers Kamen, your host. Since 2010, we've been broadcasting sound ideas for better well-being. Each week, we spotlight diverse thinkers and doers who are contemporary trendsetters and change agents, devoting their lives to creating a better world. I invite you to listen and change how you think about human happiness. Our award-winning content is fresh, optimistic, and purpose-driven media that promotes well-being from the inside out. This episode is part of the Good Citizens Election Season Survival Guide to Restoring Common Sense and Sanity in a Crazy World, produced in collaboration with renowned, fair-minded subject matter experts who provide strategies that enhance critical thinking, increase civic engagement, and foster healthy pleasure to boost personal well-being and relationship satisfaction. You can also discover more unique bonus content at More Mental Fitness by Harvesting Happiness on Substack and Medium. This episode explores human sexuality and is intended for mature audiences. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Thanks for joining me on today's show, where we are exploring aging boomers pursuing lust, love, and relationship with my friend and returning guest, Dr. Regina Koepp. Dr. Regina Koepp is a clinical psychologist, geropsychologist, and a leader in mental health and aging. As founder and CEO of the Center for Mental Health and Aging, she is committed to enhancing the well-being of older adults. Regina developed the only dementia and sexual health certification course in the United States, spotlighting the intersection of cognitive decline and intimacy. A sought-after speaker, she contributes regularly to Psychology Today and Psychotherapy Networker. Her insights on aging, mental health, and sexual health have been featured in the New York Times, NPR, the Chicago Tribune, AARP, and more. Welcome back, Regina. Thanks for joining me today.
I am so delighted to be back. This is my passion project topic. So thank you.
Well, as we age, girl, you and I, we're like the champions for the cause, right? That we should age gracefully and juicy and robust in our power and sexuality.
And unapologetically.
Unapologetically so. Let's talk about mature dating. You know, as we age, some of us are not mated and find ourselves going back out into the dating world after decades of coupledom.
That is true. Yeah, actually, there's a phenomenon. I don't like this term, but this phenomenon is coined gray divorce. And so it marks the increase in divorce rates among people 65 and older. And so there are actually more people who are single 65 and older than there used to be because the divorce rates are higher than they used to be. And so more people might be finding themselves in their boomer generation dating when they hadn't dated for years.
Sounds like a challenge. And let's talk about the how, right? Because there are so many dating apps out there, and people of this generation, of the boomer generation, not all of them are tech savvy. Not all of them understand how to download and utilize these apps. So first of all, we've got to sort of cross the Rubicon of the technology gap.
Yep, that's true. And there were some recent studies that showed that boomers are more often using online dating tools than expected and than before, and are having great success with it. And so I think it's mixed. I think some folks, just like any group we look at, we're looking at boomers, right? Or people 65 and older. Not all people 65 and older are boomers. That's just one sort of older adult category, but there's another group of older adults who are older than them. But I think some are incredibly tech savvy and some are not, just like, people are varied. But I would say that when there's a will, and sometimes intimacy and love and connection and new opportunities and the adventure of dating inspire people to make a way. And so it might be just the inspiration people need to get over the tech barrier hurdle if they're experiencing the tech barrier hurdle, if they're interested in pursuing romance. And especially if you've been partnered for decades or had been single for decades, but not dating and want to date now. I mean, it can be pretty exciting it can be limiting if you're in friendship groups where people are mated and you don't know like where to find other single people in your age group and you're curious. And so online dating can be a way to find a mate. I actually met my husband on online dating match. We were in our 30s. I got married at 38, but it can be incredibly successful for people.
That's what I hear. I have many friends who have met their partners on dating apps. But I find it very interesting that somebody who's in their 60s or 70s who may be a widow or had divorced after decades, that they get back into the game and sometimes the hilarious stories that they report of their adventures.
Yeah, I've even met people who had been married decades and so maybe something amusing or absurd is happening in your dating life, or you're experimenting. Like I've met a couple of older women who are experimenting like never before on dating apps. So like it might, in some cases, create a little more freedom and sexual liberation than maybe their marriage had for them or earlier in life with the sort of cultural demands of being prim and proper. And as much as we're in a sexually liberated society, we're also in a pretty puritanical society. And so I think there's this paradox of sexual liberation and puritanism. And I think those are in friction with each other.
Very interesting. I mean, the other thing, and we're going to talk about this on our special bonus content on a different episode, but when we are ill, when things happen to us, when we're in our later years, how sexuality plays into all of this,
And that also goes into, there are many different types of intimacy. And so we're talking, I think the assumption here is that we're talking about sex and sensuality and physical intimacy. And sometimes when people have a physical illness or a terminal illness, they can desire physical intimacy, but other types of intimacy also become more cultivated and deepened. I'm thinking like cognitive intimacy, like you're thinking about your partner, and mutual intimacy, where there's this exchange, that's mutuality between you. And I think when people are sick, it heightens all different types of intimacy because there are heightened rates of vulnerability. And when we're more vulnerable, rates of intimacy are higher. Not necessarily physical intimacy, though it could be for some people, but just the sort of all different types of intimacy are heightened because of heightened vulnerability.
And I also think of the preciousness of time.
Yeah.
I can speak to that based upon where I sit at this point in my life, and perhaps you can too, right? In my case, I have young adult children, and then I also have aging parents, and there is an awareness that there is a finite amount of time and it's precious. And how do we want to spend that? And intimacy, in intimate connection, comes up, are the words that are so strongly present.
Oh, yes. I think you're 100% right. Even separate from the intimacy conversation, just looking at older adults, there's an assumption that as we age, we're more likely to be depressed or anxious or miserable or in despair. And in fact, the opposite is true. As we age, we're more likely to experience joy and resilience and have wisdom and prioritize what's most meaningful to us. And for some people, pleasure, and we get pleasure in all sorts of ways. For some people, intimate physical pleasure is something that's most meaningful. Other people, it might not be. But I think you're so right. And that the idea is that we have this assumption that as we age, or our time is getting shorter, so wouldn't we be more miserable, when in fact, no, our time is getting shorter. So let's do what's really meaningful to us. And it heightens our priorities. It clarifies our priorities.
Yes. And the concept of wanting to absorb and create as much pleasure as possible, not only in the sexual context, right? Across everything in our lives.
Yeah. You're making me think of something that I was reflecting on in my own life recently, which is when I was growing up, I had a very complex, difficult childhood. I never knew my dad and had lots of different dads in our family, and my brothers didn't know their dads. And it was a very messy childhood, poverty. And I'm the only one who went to college, only one who went to grad school. And I thought for my whole life, like really making it in life would be becoming a professor and a psychologist. And I did all that, getting featured in NPR and New York Times. And I did all of that. But really, when I was a kid, what I really longed for was a stable, loving home and community, having like riding bikes with my family as a whole, like my partner and my kids, and experiencing cool things in life, like the eclipse together. And for me, we moved into this neighborhood. It's this magical neighborhood, and I get to experience it with my kids and family. And we went on this bike ride to watch the eclipse. And it was like this beautiful moment of like, this is what's making it. And I'm close to 50. And if I had just set on that trend toward, oh, it's all the accolades that are the most important. No, like, I think because I'm more mature in my life and maturing every day, I think it's just clarified for me, like, this is what's making it. Like, this is really what making it is about.
It is what makes it all worthwhile. Like you say, aha, this is really it, right? This is it.
And that's not unique to me.
No.
That's many people. Most of us, as we age, will clarify what's really important, clarify the relationships, clarify how we want to spend our time and who we want to spend our time with. And for me, that was just that moment and what was meaningful for me. But I'm sure for all your listeners, they'll be reflecting on what's most meaningful for you. And if that includes pleasure, beautiful. Or if you're thinking about like starting a new relationship or dating after decades of only having intimate relations with one person, or maybe the only person your whole life you've ever been intimate with, like begin to start to expand. And is that meaningful? And are you adventurous? And is that something you want to try? I think just the permission to do it, to try new things, I guess is the message I want to give.
And I think that's a very interesting thing to think about, that there are people who are listening who might have only had one lover, one sexual partner their entire lives. And either they pass or there's a divorce. And here we are as humans, again, that desire for partnership doesn't end because that relationship in this world ends, right? Like we're meant to be mated. We love love as a species.
Yeah, though, when people divorce in older adulthood, men are more likely to partner up than women. I hear a lot of older women say to me, I don't think I want to be partnered with a male partner again, but I do want like to have intimacy and pleasure. So there might be more non-traditional relationships in older
experimentation, or the cabana boy, or
yes, or, you could go that direction. You could go younger, you could go older, you could go same age. I guess just
different gender.
I mean, different,
and that happens too a lot, right?
Yes, yeah. Well, also because it was not safe to be out for a lot of people, it was not safe to openly explore your sexuality. It wasn't safe to. I've worked with many older adults who are in an opposite sex relationship, and then will reveal to me in psychotherapy that they had same-sex relationships throughout their life, and they don't want to enter the final chapter of their life or chapters of their life not having access to that part of their intimate life again. And like, it's a big loss. And even though they love their partner, their mate or their spouse, they long for exploring their full sexuality, not just a piece, or weren't able to fully express and understand their sexuality because it was thwarted by oppression and queer phobia. And so I think there are a lot of and I've had older adults who are openly gay, who have children, and the only way that they could have children was to be in an opposite sex intimate encounter with somebody, even if they despised the experience, because that was the only way to have a family. Yeah. And I'm thinking about like people in their 80s and 70s, like there was no family planning or IVF options, you know? And so, and if you were and you probably get disqualified if you wanted to do IVF as a gay person or a single person in some of the early clinics that were doing IVF. And so there were so many restrictions and barriers, not to mention you could lose your job. If you were born in 1940, you lived through the McCarthy era that would have you lose your job if you were gay. You lived through don't ask, don't tell in the military. So you had to be invisible. Like there were and HIV epidemic that was just stigmatizing and alienating to so many gay folks in the US and beyond. And so I just think there were so many barriers to people really fully being out or exploring their sexuality. And actually, there was a Gallup poll done a couple of years ago that looked at each generation from like the current young adults to the oldest old adults to see what percentage of adults self-identified as LGBTQIA+. Every generation becomes more and more prevalent. To the early adults now are like 20% of young adults identify as LGBTQIA+, where it's like a very low percentage of the silent generation or the people, the World War II generation. Like a very, very low percentage. But it's not because there were fewer people who were gay or LGBTQIA+. It's because it wasn't safe enough.
Yes.
To be out. And so it might be that there were 20% or more. I mean, still we're not safe enough we're not a secure enough, loving enough, inclusive enough society. And so there are still people who it's not safe to be out, and young adults to older adults.
We are going to take a break and then we'll come back and continue the conversation with my guest today, Dr. Regina Koepp. To learn more, please visit mentalhealthandaging.com and drreginakoepp.com, and that's Koepp. To learn more or to connect on social media, go to X at Dr. Regina Koepp, and that's actually X, Facebook, and Instagram. You can find her on LinkedIn at Regina-Koepp. Here comes that pause. We'll be right back.
Harvesting happiness is rooted in science. Our work facilitates applied positive psychology practices through media and consulting. We're committed to sound ideas for better well-being, leading to increased life satisfaction and a better world for everyone. We're not into pseudoscience or quick fixes. We're focused on common sense backed by rigorous research. Healthy critical thinking is the foundation for our discussions. We encourage you to challenge preconceptions and explore ideas with a curiously discerning mind. Collaboration with our guests is united by an inclusive vision to boost resilience, critical thinking, communication, and problem solving through civilized discourse and pleasurable relational engagement for everyone. Each day, we have the intellectual freedom to be happy or the liberty to be miserable, regardless of external circumstances. If you or someone you know is struggling with mental health, please seek support because good psychological health is vital to the achievement of a healthy and satisfying life. Visit harvestinghappiness.com for psychosocial and educational services that boost emotional and social intelligence. This episode explores human sexuality and is intended for mature audiences. And we're back, continuing my conversation with Dr. Regina Koepp. We're talking about aging boomers pursuing lust, love, and relationship. Let's get back to it.
So, Regina, let's talk about some tips.
Sure. Yeah.
We find ourselves single and ready to have at it. What do we do?
Right. So you're newly single, you're ready to start dating and exploring. Here's what I would say. Learn about STIs, sexually transmitted infections.
Yes.
So
I've heard about this.
Yes. STIs are on the rise among people 65 and older. In fact, in the last 10 years, they've doubled. So chlamydia, gonorrhea, and syphilis have doubled in the last 10 years among people 65 and older. And not HIV, that hasn't doubled. And that's because there's very good public education. I would say, though, that the 50% of people living with HIV are over the age of 50. And that's because people are living longer with HIV. It's considered a chronic, not a terminal condition as it once was. And that's a success story for HIV. But there are other STIs that you need to be aware of. And many older adults, there wasn't sex education in their upcoming or their rearing or education system. And many older adults think, well, I can't get pregnant anymore, but aren't thinking about STIs. And so it's really important. And so you might know them as STDs, sexually transmitted diseases. The more common term now is STI, which is sexually transmitted infection. And that's because infections can be treated and managed. And I don't know the research on herpes, and it's hard to find that because it's so prominent, I think, just in society in general of all ages. But
doesn't it burn out as we age? The virus burns out?
I don't know the answer to that. But I have had patients who had new diagnoses of herpes from intercourse in older, like 70s, in their 70s, who are starting new relationships and contract herpes. So I would not put that off the table in terms of imperviousness to getting it. But I would say get educated, look it up, understand, also get educated about condoms and dental dams, and which are basically a female condom or a vaginal condom. And so get informed. You can go to the CDC website and get informed about these things. You can talk to your doctor. I will say from our last episode on sex and aging, doctors are not talking enough with older clients about sex. The majority of older adults want to have a conversation with their doctor about sex and intimacy, but the majority of doctors are not asking. And so it's really important that you start talking with your physician about sexually transmitted infections and how to protect yourself. And also, if you want to use enhancements like Cialis or Viagra, to talk with your doctor about that as well. There is one medication for women to enhance libido, so you could talk to your doctor about that, called Addyi. And so every person will have their own constellation of medical needs and conditions and medications. And so you want to be sure that you're talking with your physician before you start adding other supplements to your medication profile, just so there aren't interaction effects.
But some motherly advice from you to everybody listening is protect yourself. And yes. I do think that we don't think about that at all.
No, well, and especially older adults aren't thinking about. So also, like many people have never worn a condom before who are over 65. And many people don't want to wear a condom over 65. Like maybe it already is hard to generate and maintain an erection, and you really want that, right? Yeah. And it's important to be educated about the risks, though, because that might shift how you think about intercourse. Maybe you're thinking more about oral sex versus intercourse or other types of sexual intimacy. But I think you really need to be thinking about safe sex practices.
Physical health, number one.
Yeah.
Physical health, number one. Let's talk about, as we age, the relationship that we have with our bodies and the reality of how our bodies change and respond, because the response changes too.
Oh, yeah. So you could have less frequent orgasms. You could have a harder time achieving orgasm. You have less lubrication for females, maybe a difficult time maintaining erection for males. It's very complex. And so having good lubrication is really important. But you're, I think, really asking about body acceptance. Like, How do we love ourselves in spite of changes that we dislike?
Like cellulite or back fat.
Yes. My back fat, my front fat.
Or love handles.
Yeah. My thigh fat, all the fat.
All of it. All of it. Whiskers, all of it.
Whiskers and on your chin and on your boobs, like all the places.
Or the butt. The wild hairs of the
It brings a new meaning to wild hair.
Wild hairs of the wisdom years.
Yeah.
But it's all real.
It's all real and will be exposed.
Yeah.
Whether you're letting your partner see it or not. I mean, we're facing it in our own appreciation.
It's in our heads.
It's in our heads. We're constantly exposed, even without even without a sex partner. We're looking at this stuff.
Oh, doctor, what do we do?
Get it right. And society doesn't give us any favors because it just prizes youth and beautiful bodies of young people. And so I think this is back to that tension of opposites. We don't like it, right? And yet, how do we love ourselves anyway? And see ourselves as sensual and desirable anyway? And that, I think, is a tough balance to strike for everyone, even the healthiest and most body accepting among us. Like, I'm thinking about, there's this concept called body confidence. Like, how confident are you in your body and letting people see it? And how much do you love your body? And so for myself, if I'm getting my body has changed so much, right? I had kids in my 40s, and then following that, I had perimenopause, like a lot of, stuff happening in my body in my 40s.
Feel for you.
Yeah, thank you. And my body, and I used to have this incredible, and still my body's healthy and does incredible things for me. And so what I have to do, instead of looking at the loss, the gap, and my own self, like, this is what I used to be, and look at me now, like, what a shame. Instead of having that perspective, I have to think of the gain. So I have to think of, look at what my body is capable of at this stage in my life. Look at how much I'm able to do. I have to start shifting from the gap to the gain.
The fact that we are getting it on, like the other part of it, the other side is like, I am so lucky that as I age, I still get to have this pleasure, to want the pleasures of the skin. Yes, the desire may change, the libido may change, but that's pretty good, right? To look at it in that way, the reframe.
Yes. And I think slowly over time, the more gratitude we can express for what our body can do now and what pleasure we can experience now, the others, it might not feel so much like a gap. The gap may close a little. I don't know that it will, who knows? Maybe for some people it'll close all the way, and other people will be a constant encouragement to not look at the gap or the loss and the change, but to look at what we're getting now at this stage of our life.
Which is maybe the inner satisfaction, right? Like, instead of saying, oh, look at these parts that are no longer where they once were, everything has gone south. It's like, oh, the places these droopy breasts have been,
Oh, yes.
The stories they can tell.
The stories they could tell. Yeah. Oh, wow. So there's this other thing. I think researchers have looked at emotional experiences of older adults related to sexual expression and found that actually older women, despite these societal norms, have higher levels of self-confidence. But researchers have actually looked at this, like what happens to our self-acceptance as we age. And as we age, some researchers have found that women grow to be more comfortable in their skin. And this is a trend. This is not everybody, right? But and that people actually do indeed do the psychological work of learning to love ourselves and our bodies, and to look at, oh my gosh, I can garden for hours and I'm sore, but it feels so good. Like, what a gift to be able to do that.
Yes.
Like, I can have intimacy and physical intimacy and still experience orgasms, which aren't the same as when I was in my 20s and 30s and early 40s.
But they're there.
They're like, here I am. It's just it's a little blip. It's no longer a tidal wave. It is a little wave. It's at a lake.
It's a wave. There's motion in the ocean,
That's right. There is motion. Yeah. There is some motion in the ocean. Yeah. But so can you be comfortable in your, and so like this, Lisa, like, could we have conversations like this? I probably couldn't really, I would want to relate to women in my 20s and 30s and early 40s about this experience, but I couldn't possibly know.
We don't even talk about it at that point in our lives. But now we are feeling secure that we can do that. We share, it's almost like this invisible bond and a part of the rite of passage, which makes me feel, I don't know about you, but makes me feel pretty empowered.
Oh, and just that there are people like you, Lisa, and I'm thinking about like other women. I'm thinking about Naomi Watts, who has that menopause sort of brand, and other celebrities who are talking about menopause and changes in your body and sexuality, and how important just opening the conversation is.
Yeah.
And how it is destigmatizing, it is bridge building, it's honoring a true human experience to allow us to experience our humanity fully, like with pleasure. I just think it's so great. It is this invisible bridge, which is part of, and bond, like you said, which is part of self-compassion, this idea of knowing that we're not alone in these changes and that other women who are beautiful, just like you, are going through it too.
Exactly. And for men who are listening, who are reckoning with the changes, what they used to do all day long takes them all day to do. I mean, there's that. And now there's that side of it. And so in that way, we are all in it together. And I think to be able to have the conversation and encourage people to have beautiful sex and intimacy in whatever way that feels right to them is the liberation, right? That is the conversation and the mission.
Yeah. And whatever shape or form it takes for you that feels right for you and your body. And I would say, though, even if you're struggling and it's important to you to maintain intimacy and you're struggling, there are some helpful tools that it would be helpful to talk with your provider, your physician about. And if they don't know, ask for a referral to somebody who does. So for men, I'm thinking if your primary care provider doesn't know, ask for a urology consult. If for women, if your primary care provider doesn't know or your gynecologist doesn't know, ask for a consult to somebody who would, like a gynecologist who specializes in older women, because they will know. They will know how to guide you and your body. But I would not take no for an answer. Because also physicians, just like the society is undereducated on this topic, physicians are undereducated on this topic. And so don't take no for an answer, ask for a consult. So if your provider doesn't know, ask.
And in life in general, don't take no for an answer. Like nevertheless, she persisted because that sort of that rigor to kind of go after the things that we want is within our right to do.
100%. So this reminds me that sex is on Maslow's hierarchy of need. Sex is at the very base and in the middle. And so sex is part of intimacy and relationships, but it's also part of at the very base, our excretion system. So it's right there with eating and defecating. And our bodies have to have it. That's why we have wet dreams. And so I would say, don't take no for, like, this is your birthright in many aspects. Yes. It's part of actually being human and functioning.
Well, it's like also prostate health. I mean, I'm not a guy, but I do know that part of good prostate health is keeping the plumbing moving.
Yes. Yeah.
I can't imagine it wouldn't be the same for women.
Well, it is. So there's when people are menopausal and engaging in intimacy. So when we're menopausal, our vaginal structure changes. And the more sexual activity we have, the more intact the structure of our vaginal walls and all of the dynamics there, and the lower our risk for some illnesses. And so sex is healthy. And I'm like convincing myself right now because my libido is shifting because of menopause. And so I'm telling myself like, oh yes, I have to remember that this is important.
Yes.
And so while earlier in life, it might have you've been spontaneously aroused. Later in life, you might have to work toward arousal, and that's normal too, but that it might be worth it for your body and healthy for your body to do so.
And for stress management, which is like the point of this series that we're working on right now is how do we manage this place that every human on the planet is going into with the shift of our geopolitical climate. We're stressed, we're anxious. There's so much that's unknown, and having good sex and having that release is a fantastic tool. I'm just going to say it like that.
Indeed. And in a time when people are feeling especially alienated or like separate from others and wanting to distance yourself, sex inspires the attachment chemical oxytocin. And so that it will bring us closer to people we love. So that's one thing. And in terms of how it helps. But the other is dopamine. It increases
pleasure.
Dopamine, which is good for us. And then also empathy.
Yeah.
And connection. And so it has a lot of different rewards, not just neurotransmitter rewards, but also in terms of our sense of connection and belonging.
We are going to wrap this segment and carry on in our special edition bonus content. To learn more about Dr. Regina Koepp, please visit her websites, mentalhealthandaging.com and drreginakoepp.com. I also want to mention that Regina has her own podcast that has been on the airwaves for several years. What's the name of the podcast?
Psychology of Aging.
There we go. And you can connect on social media at Dr. Regina Koepp, and that's Koepp on X, Facebook, and Instagram. You can find her on LinkedIn at Regina-Koepp. Thanks so much, Regina. As always, I love our conversations.
Me too. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for joining us today on Harvesting Happiness. This is Lisa Cypers Kamen on behalf of my guest, Dr. Regina Koepp. Wishing you kind thoughts, kinder words, and the kindest of actions. Until next time, remember, happiness is an inside job. Happiness is your inside job. Please go out and rock your day, and remember to be kind to one another, and remember to register and vote. Want to explore more sound ideas for better well-being? You can listen to part 2 of this conversation and the Good Citizens Election Season Survival Guide to Restoring Common Sense and Sanity in a Crazy World at More Mental Fitness by Harvesting Happiness on Substack and Medium. Subscribe, listen, and share hundreds of downloadable episodes wherever you get your podcasts. Connect with and follow us on most social media channels. To learn more about lifestyle management and mental fitness consulting services, please visit harvestinghappiness.com. Harvesting Happiness and More Mental Fitness are produced by Lisa Cypers Kamen, Andrea Mengele, Robin Boyd, Andrea Daly, and the excellent team at Podfly Productions, including Eric Begay, Kimberly Beck, and Alec Guess, in collaboration with TogiNet Radio, KBUU, RadioMalibu.net, and is available on PRX, the Public Radio Exchange.